Welcome to the 128th season of the Canadian Club Toronto, Canada's Podium. For over a century, this platform has been a gathering place for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to discuss the most pressing issues of our time.
We've been having important discussions and debates around this podium in this country for well over a century. I call this a historic podium of record.
Our club's always been a forum for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to command attention to the issues of our time.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Hi to all of you that are joining us online. My name is Martin Basiri. I'm a proud Canadian Club Toronto director, co-founder of Applyboard, and founder and CEO of Passage, and your host today. Welcome to those of you that are joining online, and again, thank you so much for everyone who joined here. One of the features that attracted me to this club was its impressive list of relevant events with the leaders, influencers, and thought leaders that I'm interested in hearing from. At the end of the story, we need to hear from them. We need to understand them, and they're humans as well. And it's very important to have a dialogue both ways to understand each other better. Today's event is fitting example. We take pride in bringing you speakers that address topics that are top of the mind and close to our hearts. Our longevity is due to a strong support we enjoy from an impressive roster of sponsors, supporters, and the partners. This is including our season sponsor, Canadian Banker Association, and our official airline sponsor, Air Canada. Is 3 times partner working closely with us to help reduce the carbon footprint by planting a smart forest in our honor. We are especially pleased that EVI is the presenting sponsor today. Thank you. We will hear about this shortly. Welcome to the students from U of T, where you are sitting right now. We have a group of students from U of T Political Science program. We expect good questions from you today. Let me highlight a few housekeeping things and items for you. You are invited to visit our Canadian Club website, canadianclub.org. Event and membership details are available, and so information on our demand event feature. And please be a member. We also appreciate if when you post about us and tag us on social media. What question do you have for today's guest speakers? Is it about the numbers, the process, the timing? Please complete the question card that you have on your table, and we will share with them with the moderator. For those of you that are joining online, please hit the submit a question button and ask your question. And now I'm pleased to invite Matthias Stein from EY Law to introduce our guest speakers.
Thank you, Martin, and you're certainly a hard act to follow. I will say, as an immigrant myself, being here for almost 35 years now, it's wonderful to be here today with you. The Honourable Marc Miller has one of the most complex and challenging portfolios in the government, and having just had some chat with him over lunch, I can guarantee that's certainly the case. His track record demonstrates success in taking on challenging and challenges and addressing complexity. The Montrealer is about to mark his 10th anniversary in federal politics as Member of Parliament for Ville-Marie de Sout West Ile-de-Sur. Before his immigration, refugees and citizenship portfolio, he served as Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations and Minister of Indigenous Services. His historic statement in the House of Commons, delivered entirely in Mohawk 7 years ago, was the first time the language had been spoken at the federal level since Confederation. Once a practicing lawyer specializing in mergers and acquisitions, he is known for his advocacy on increased federal investment in affordable housing, public transit, and the Canada Child Benefit. He has supported several charitable and pro bono legal initiatives and has authored constitutional and human rights law articles. I also learned today from Minister Miller, if I can share the story, that his father authored a book on the South African Boer War, which I thought was very interesting as a fellow South African. Moderating the conversation is Stacey Lee Kong, the editor-in-chief of 3 Magazine, a new quarterly print magazine that celebrates third culture individuals, newcomers to Canada, first-generation Canadians, and the culturally curious. Minister Miller, Stacey, welcome to Canada's podium.
Hello.
Hi, Stacey.
How are you doing?
Good.
Good. So I want to start with a maybe basic question. Set the tone, let's sort of level set question. So according to the government's immigration plan published in November 2023, which is still this month, absolutely still this month, what is time? Canada has planned to admit about 485,000 permanent residents in 2024, and then 500,000 in 2025 and 26, which are levels that have been adjusted down by about, or sorry, that was the plan. And then now we've been adjusted down to 395,000 for 2025, 380,000 for 26, and 365,000 for 2027. So a reduction of about 20%. I'm hoping that you can explain that first, the thinking behind immigration targets. What does it mean to have immigration targets? And then how you arrived at these new numbers.
Really good question. First, hi everyone. It's really nice to see. I didn't know how big the group would be today.
I know. I didn't either.
I guess
here we all are.
I guess there's some people that can't afford Taylor Swift tickets, so I'm gonna say.
All of us here.
And I found out. Well, we won't talk about our mutual affection for Taylor Swift because it's
that is the correct way
close
of saying
to non-existent.
That,
but in any event. We've outed 2 people that are not the biggest fans, but really glad for this.
Really happy for the people who are excited to see her.
As well
here
as I
to
am.
talk about something slightly different.
Back to levels. Well,
I'm sorry. I know you were trying to go that way, but we're coming back to.
I did admit her to the country, so
you did?
I did do my part.
That was for the Swifties in the room, specifically for you.
The TIFF folks know what I'm talking about, by the way. In any event, look, it's great to be here. The last levels plan that we announced 2 weeks ago, it feels like it was a lot longer because the plan for next year has already started. It represented a couple of things. First, a very important listening exercise with Canadians, whether it's people we meet at the door, whether it's people that, economists that we speak to, whether it's listening to caucus from different parties, frankly, and everyone, which seems to be everyone in this country that has an opinion on immigration. And things have changed in the last year. Last year, when I was relatively new to this post, we froze the numbers, which were at historic highs of permanent residency at what would have been this year 500,000. It became obvious over the course of the year, and I said to anyone who asked me that I wasn't particularly dogmatic about it, but that in order to stabilize the system, in order to present to Canadians a system that is more controlled and more managed, we need to do a couple things. First, a significant reduction in the levels by 20%, still high, but ones that reflected what I think consensus among economists, consensus among Canadians, obviously consensus doesn't mean unanimity, to reduce the levels, and that is of permanent residency. But also, as part of this levels plan, which is, it's a legal exercise that I'm forced to do every year before November 1st and put before Parliament. It is a very bureaucratic exercise, but it had been increasingly looked upon as a snapshot of what population growth looked like, what immigration looked like generally, which is not necessarily the intellectual pedagogical exercise that this plan is intended for under the law. But we felt the need to integrate a large growing sector of the population in temporary residence, which has grown to about a little under 7% of the population, according to StatsCan's latest numbers. Those increases have impacted the economy in a number of ways, positively, in terms of avoiding recessions, making the labor force younger. But it's come with a conundrum, as the Bank of Canada said, insofar it has contributed in its volume to issues in and around affordability, availability of the housing stock that is a shared jurisdiction among all our levels of government, impact on social services, and so forth. So two parts to the equation, and ones that we had to increasingly account for. So this current plan that I put forward profiles a reduction and some of the policy measures that a Bank of Canada has asked us to put in and to flesh out and put on paper in reducing the temporary population from 7% to 5% in 3 years, which is a significant endeavor, particularly among half of that temporary population, which is among international students and postgraduate work permits, a system that had gotten overheated, but also reducing, and that became quite obvious over the course of the year. And with permanent residency, these are people that have invested, and you heard Martin, invested time, capital, some of the best, brightest, most qualified people that will then become Canadian citizens. Needed to be a longer process in figuring out where, how much we reduced, and in what categories. So these are always difficult decisions, and as I was mentioning to Betty, it's in a period of growth, it's easy to sprinkle a little here, sprinkle a little there. It is a different intellectual exercise when you ask people to make cuts, and that affects everyone. But I think it was important in making sure that we were presenting to Canadians a manageable and a controlled immigration system that we can continue to be proud of.
Yes. So I want to talk a little bit more about international students and about temporary workers, though. So maybe starting with temporary workers, those numbers are being reduced as well, as you noted, but this has sparked some major concerns from the business community around labor shortages. So I know the target for temporary foreign workers is being reduced to 82,000, and that target is static for the next 3 years. But the targets for the International Mobility Program are being reduced over, like, each year will be a reduction. So what is the government's plan to address the business community's concerns?
And to take a step back, we have grown in a 10-year period from a temporary population in Canada from about 2% plus or minus to close to 7%. The pie chart that represents temporary workers is generally comprised, as I mentioned earlier, of international students that have grown exponentially over the last few years, and the postgraduate work permits that come with them. It's created a whole ecosystem that I've spoken quite publicly about. And then, so that's half. And in the other half, a mishmash of our humanitarian undertakings, 300,000 Ukrainians. No one would forgive us for not taking those. No one would forgive us for sending them back precipitously just to fill out an economic operation. We obviously have to maintain our humanitarian goals as a country. Those people that come here under the international mobility agreements as part of our free trade agreements across the world, and the low-skilled temporary labor flows that are managed by my colleague Randy Boissonneau. All of those categories have jumped over the last few years, and they're ones that we have to take a sober look at and say, where do we make the reductions that make sense? Where has the system gotten overheated? And I think to the business community, it is a fact that we have gotten addicted to foreign workers as a country. The responsibility is shared jurisdictionally, but also with respect to who gets what in what business, for what cost, what price, what are the margins. I don't think anyone wants the Minister of Immigration going in and looking at a small business's balance sheet and telling them where to cut this, that, and there. I mean, there's some responsibility on both sides in a free market to make sure that we are adjusting, but also making sure that we are doing it with the conscience, knowing that people that come here in a way where they're not necessarily treated perhaps as Canadian citizens would be treated in the marketplace, Absolutely. As permanent residents would be treated in the marketplace, is a collective failure. Not to blame employers, because most employers are responsible, but when systems get overheated, abuses do occur, and it's up to the federal government, provincial governments, and businesses themselves to adjust. We're in a lucky position insofar as we do have an untapped large labor pool in Canada, whether we're talking about current asylum seekers on work permits, and lots of businesses doing work with people looking for jobs that have come here fleeing oppression and war, but also people that are here on the postgraduate work permits that have not necessarily matched their skills that they were told they were going to learn in the schools that they spent perhaps $100,000 to attend, with the labor market that they end up integrating, which could be it could be not aligned with the programs that they attended. And so I think there's some opportunity to adjust. It's going to take some effort, and to some extent we don't have a choice. So we're willing, the federal government's, as you can tell, the federal government's involvement is not limited simply to deciding how many passports they're going to stamp or how many visa documents they're going to issue. It is a much, and this is why the levels plan are so important, it is a big pedagogical, intellectual exercise that has real repercussions in real life for businesses, for people, for humans, and it's one that we have to be very careful in adjusting, not overcorrecting, but also making sure we're getting the proper mix of people that are fighting so hard to do something that I didn't do because I was born here, citizenship was given to me, but inevitably to become Canadian citizens.
So I want to pause a little bit though, because this is not necessarily your purview because it's not your portfolio, but can you speak to how we can communicate the larger scale plan then? Because like the large scale plan, because if we're talking about, okay, there's a misalignment between what international students may come here to study and then what the labor market looks like. And also seems to be a lot of outcry from business leaders that there's a misalignment between what their businesses need and what our labor force is trained to do or is interested in doing. How do we bring those things together? Because we have the human problem of how do we be a welcoming place? How do we maintain this national identity that is built in immigration, but also a very practical problem of how do the companies that need the workers get the workers?
Yeah, that's a lot of questions.
It was a lot of questions. And it's like a failure of journalism. I'm really only supposed to ask one question at a time, but I need to give you some backstory.
There's a couple of reporters that'll shotgun, they get 2 questions, and they'll shotgun like 8 questions, and then you kind of like...
Sometimes I have a lot to say.
You got to pick, you got to pick the ones that suit you.
But how do you bring the things together?
Yeah, and this is a daily challenge. I'd say, first, as Martin said, we're the best country in the world, and I want to keep it that way. When I speak to people like Filippo Grandi, who is the head of the United Nations High Commission on Refugees, and he himself is saying that the reductions that we are putting into place, even in the humanitarian categories, are very important if they maintain the social cohesion of a country. Now, that's not nobody saying that, and that's someone who, by right, if he's looking at other countries, if he's looking at Egypt that has millions of refugees on their borders, if he's looking at other countries, could probably say Canada is in a very envious position. But we're one of their top referral countries, and he knows he needs to build that relationship and keep that relationship with us. And if I can't convince Canadians that this is the right thing, we lose and we further chip away at a consensus that is under threat because of external forces in countries that we compare ourselves to that have taken a bit of an anti-immigration slant. And that consensus that we have carefully built with challenges over the last century and a half, including racist policies up to the 1960s as to who we admitted, are ones that in the latter decades have been quite positive. I'm not going to ignore that those challenges don't exist. And why do I say that as sort of a larger answer to the series of questions that you posed implicitly? Is because that is when we are aligning market needs and when I see programs that are intended towards international excellence and high quality students, and those students aren't graduating into programs, and 13,000 of them have filed for asylum claims. That's a collective failure in our society, and a market failure, frankly, that economists would call it, in making sure that those best and brightest actually integrated where they needed to be. And if I needed an immigration pathway that was solely dedicated to lower skilled, and there's dignity in all sorts of work, but with lower skilled jobs, I wouldn't have charged them $100,000 in the first place. And I think that is where we need to align the talent with the skill set, whether you're talking about the immigrants that come in under the permanent residency streams, crazy scores, contribute immediately to the gross domestic product, make the workforce younger, or people that are fleeing war and oppression. And I think if one of those programs or categories comes under attack or is seen as being used and abused, or gets overheated, the entirety of the system gets questioned. And I think that is very dangerous for for countries, and we've seen, as mentioned earlier, we've seen in countries where that consensus is no longer there, and it paves the way for some very dangerous thought that we've carefully avoided as a country and hope to avoid it in the next election.
I have more questions about that, but we're going to get there. I would like to focus a little bit on international students because a lot of the conversation around anti-immigrant sentiment has been focused on international students. And even just to think about how do you see these immigration changes impacting post-secondary education in general? Because there's the philosophical problem, but there's also a real, again, practical problem of many schools have built a revenue plan around international students and now have to cut that quite drastically.
Yeah, and if you take this in perspective on a 10 and even perhaps illustratively on a 20-year trailing average, we're still at very significant highs for international students coming into the country. I think we could all agree that this question wouldn't be posed and it wouldn't have had sort of the newsworthiness that it's had over the last couple of years if all I had to do was to approve a study permit for 3 years with nothing in and around it. There is this ecosystem that's been created, I think rightly to some extent, of making sure that there is a pathway, a possible pathway to permanent residency, a postgraduate work permit pathway. It has filled labor needs in this country that were so desperately needed, particularly coming out of the pandemic, with structural challenges in and around supply chains, with labor markets that were crying for skill. And that made sense. It doesn't make sense anymore in the numbers that we saw. And if you look at the hockey stick graphic that I was facing, if we hadn't put a cap on this, which is a rough instrument, a rough measure that affected everyone, we would be facing a crisis in this country of people that we could not integrate into the permanent population and then would essentially be stranded here. The plan that I put forward this year forces my department, forces provincial departments to focus on the pool of talent that's here, and that includes international students, with the possibility of becoming a permanent resident. It's not a right, it's a privilege. And I think if you want to have value to Canadian citizenship or the permanent residency that comes before it, we have to fight to preserve that value. And that is super important. A university's balance sheet is a concern to me. It is one that has a history to it that has nothing to do with international students. There has been systemic underfunding in the post-secondary sector for an industry that we claim to be the best in the world. I believe it is, but there's a whole discussion to be had with the underfunding of universities and colleges that are training the talent and trading the intellectual capital of Canada. It is largely a provincial jurisdiction, and I think to some extent, as budgets and people have profiled the revenue streams, doing it solely on international student revenue is not ideal. It doesn't work and wasn't sustainable. My fundamental question is, and to a large extent we are dealing with kids, a younger segment of the population that put their hopes and dreams in coming to Canada, is who's taking care of them. And that, as the Minister of Immigration, perhaps not something that falls in my mandate letter, but is a very human reaction for anyone seeing 13,000 students filing for asylum this year alone, sometimes after only a few months of study. I never asked any institution to pay to ask 50 grand from a student to be here in Canada, a place that is sort of expensive to live in, but that's the revenue stream, and that's the model. And I think the serious question we have to ask ourselves, and the federal government's not an exception to this, is where did this get overheated? How do we, the measures I put forward are getting more and more surgical, but we're not there, I don't think, where we need to be. There's a rebranding exercise that we need to get done. We also have to make sure that, and this has been the top of my mind, because any minister that cares about their credibility, one, can't be everything to everyone. Two, has to be able to use the instruments within their own powers to effect change. Make sure that provinces and territories are properly assuming their responsibility, that their own auditors general have been saying for years needs to get fixed. And I think that's part of the next step that is going on. There's some positive news there as well, because again, this is about making sure a program continues to focus on excellence and contributing to the economy in the way that it should. And if that means reduced volume for better quality, I think that's, in my mind, a good thing.
I do want to go back to what you said about who's taking care of these international students, who's taking care in general, because this is sort of a question from the audience and my question, so we're putting them together. But part of the challenge facing anyone who's coming to this country is around settlement services. It's about not just welcoming people into this country or allowing them into this country, however we want to word that, but also what happens once you're here. And so are there plans in place? What are the plans in place to ensure that the settlement services are actually there to support people? Like it to your point, is definitely a failure on multiple levels if young people are coming to this country paying thousands upon thousands of dollars and then needing to seek asylum and being sort of exploited on multiple factors.
I mean, look, the way it works is once someone is adjudicated to be a protected person under the Immigration Refugee Board, they are entitled to federal supports. Until then, those supports are fewer and far between and more on an emergency basis. Interim health benefits and others, you have cries from some people to say to cut them to prevent the draw. I resist that, but understand the analysis. I think it is an odd proposition to say that someone that was here that was never supposed to file for asylum in the first place should have had the sufficient funds, should have had the support from the institution that it paid a tremendous amount of money for, should get settlement services when you expect that integration process to happen over the period of the education. So it's a discussion to be had, but I think that at some point when you look at the revenue model that was created, the federal government was perhaps the only entity not making revenue in the way that, in this case, Ontario is making. There's been studies about how the provincial budget was balanced on the backs of international students. I'm not making this up. But also the institutions that have been able to profit quite handily on something that they should have done over the last 3 years, which is properly take care of students. Not to suggest that every student experience is identical and the same. Most, I think, have been quite positive. And to the ones that do exceed the permanent residency, the need for settlement services is almost nil, just like any economic migrant. So there's a challenge there. You're seeing a need. I don't deny the need, but it is one that is currently lacking. And I think I have to have a conversation with institutions and provinces because this is about, chase the money and see where it went. And I think we can find out where it went wrong.
And because regardless of how someone got here or why they got here, what was supposed to happen, if you're here and you're in need of support, someone has to take responsibility.
Absolutely, and I think that's what we're seeing. That is currently what we're seeing with some of the funds that we're making available to provinces, depending on the provincial arrangement that we have. It differs by province, but interim housing, interim health benefits. But again, these are volume challenges that any government needs to get under control. And that's something that we're in the process of doing currently.
I do want to talk a little bit about humanitarian responses. You brought up 300,000 people from Ukraine. How does Canada plan to respond to potential increases in demand for its asylum system to address human rights concerns that may be impacted by new U.S. policies? Because we've definitely seen a sharp rise in panic, anecdotally.
I think, if there's any conclusion to be had, is that every 4 years, Canada becomes a keen observer of U.S. politics. Sometimes commentators otherwise think they know America inside. I spent 4 years in New York City. My conclusion after that is I really don't understand America as much as I thought I did. That would stand true for any New Yorker, for that matter, because it is a bit of a different animal. But we followed that election quite closely, saw some of the rhetoric in around immigration. I think and currently, this is something that is the subject of a lot of speculation. I don't want to dismiss people's fears, but if there's anything that we've proven as Canadians is, I guess, two things. Anything America does, the US does, affects us, no matter how small. And two, we tend to over-prepare, and I think that's a good thing. If you look at the previous Trump administration, during a particularly testing time of our history, we were able to prepare for suggestions that the northern border should be militarized, able to convince people that shouldn't be the case, secure the flow of goods across the border, incredibly important, and to manage something that is in both our interests, which is a safe and secure southern border for us, northern border for the US. And I will agree, we will have philosophical differences with the Trump administration, I think for the right reasons. But we are aligned on a basic premise, which is their challenges or problems shouldn't necessarily be ours to fix. And I think vice versa. Whatever they are seeing and they are attributing to us, we need to address and do it in the way that we do it, firmly, fairly, but in a humane fashion. When it comes to the border, those interests are largely aligned. So there'll be some tough conversations, but we'll always, I think Canadians can always expect that we'll be acting in the national interest. And, maybe we can show some leadership in how immigration is done and done well. I'm not in the business of telling other countries what to do. We've got our own challenges, but when you look at how we do economic migration in this country, 60% of our immigration plan, even when you exclude the parents, grandparents categories and the humanitarian aspects, which have economic benefits to them, obviously, that's 60% of our plan. It is an immediate addition to the gross domestic product of the country. The U.S. does that at around 25%. So they have some opportunities there. But again, I'm not going to tell them what to do. We have enough to do on our border. And yes, we do have to control some of the volume that is coming in, do it in the right way. And I owe it to Canadians to give the administration a chance and to work with my counterpart in our national interest always. And so that's kind of my initial thoughts on things without speculating too much about
I've done a lot of speculating, so I'll let you not speculate. The last thing that I want to ask about before we move on to some more audience questions is around this idea of anti-immigrant sentiment. So you said that you felt like it's been fairly controlled. I would respectfully push back on that. And so I want to ask about, I think it's actually undeniable that we're seeing a massive spike in anti-immigrant sentiment. There's a poll in August that found that 65% of Canadians surveyed believe the Canadian government's current immigration plan, so before our updated levels, will admit too many people. Anecdotally, we've seen many more racist and xenophobic social media posts targeting immigrants. When you are making decisions around immigration targets, how do you manage the messaging to ensure that the government is not inadvertently contributing to that sentiment or empowering that sentiment?
Well, we don't want to create the conditions for that, even indirectly, to flourish. And in our policies that we have to prove daily to Canadians are sound when it comes to immigration, controllable and manageable, makes sense to people. I don't want to call anyone who says there's too many people coming into the country. And there's the iteration of that I get from, my uncle that's had too much to drink at the dinner table, and someone that's just concerned seeing things. And I'm not going to call him a racist, and nor should we. There is racist sentiment in Canada, and there's systemic racism. No denying that. There are polls that say that 18+% of maybe the same poll you quoted or one that was done in and around that, but people don't want immigrants, and that's they're allowed to have that view. I don't agree with it, and I'm going to fight really hard to fight that sentiment. But I got to have conversations with everyone. There's people that want even more, and I get that too. But we can't do it, and I think that given the numbers, and these are difficult discussions. And I'm not paid to have easy discussions, but difficult discussions that we have, whether it's around the dinner table, whether it's around the policy table. And I think dismissing or ignoring views that are different than yours without demonizing them is very important. It's an important political exercise, and it's one that I owe it to people to do. I think what I put forward this year is something that is reasonable, it's manageable. I don't want to demonize anyone. I want to make sure that the flows of people we have in this country are ones that we have the capacity to properly serve, because we know when this sentiment turns, the first people to pay for it isn't a guy like me. It's someone that either is an immigrant or
looks
quote unquote looks like an immigrant. So, but we all pay for it in the end. And so these are challenges. I think the messaging is one that is very important. It's important for people like me, but it's also important for crowds like this, for the business councils that constantly come and say we need more and we need more, but need to do a better job selling the immigration consensus, because it is something that we've built. I know you disagree with me on, on the sentiment, and you do see a rise of it, of anti-immigrant sentiment. And despite the fact that we see at least one party that does play footsie with some sentiment, but I'm not gonna. It's too late.
We have more
it's too late
questions, so it's okay. You could just.
It's too late.
You can finish this thought.
To pick on that guy, but we have largely in parties not had overt anti-immigrant sentiment in the way that we've seen it in similar countries. And if we can achieve that through the next election, I think that is not a victory for democracy, a victory for Canada. And I don't want to be in a situation where I'm doing ads on how I cut him, alarmist. You saw that in the UK with the Conservative Party messaging about what they'd done to this, that, and that stream, or shipping people to Rwanda. And so I think that is that's something I don't want to indulge in, or would prefer not to fight against. But if it does come up, you can bet your. There's a polite word there, but I can't find it.
We're gonna say bottom dollar on that one, I think. But okay, so from the audience, the government has announced that the Francophone immigrant percentage objective will be maintained. However, will the funding be increased in order to ensure that we will not have any issues with housing?
This is the Francophone. There's no guarantee for housing for Francophone, but there are, obviously my colleague Sean Fraser is putting a lot of funds into making sure that the federal government's doing a part in housing. And it actually is a real issue in smaller. Je vais parler en français puisque ça fait partie de notre identité nationale. Cette année, j'ai annoncé, puis si on prend un pas en arrière, historiquement, le gouvernement fédéral n'a pas nécessairement fait son travail en ce qui a trait aux communautés francophones. C'est-à-dire qu'on accueille à près de 3% de l'immigration pour les communautés francophones en dehors du Québec. C'était pas assez pour rétablir les niveaux de gens qui parlaient français au pays en dehors du Québec dans les années 70, les années 80. Alors, ce que j'ai fait cette année, c'est d'augmenter à 10% le nombre de gens qui vont venir au pays, qui parlent français, pour qu'ils puissent s'établir dans des communautés qui sont francophones en dehors du Québec, qui souvent, et je sais qu'il y a une grosse communauté francophone à Toronto, qui souvent, plus souvent que non, sont dans des petites communautés. Donc, question de logement, question évidemment d'accès à des services en français, c'est immensément important pour les Franco-ontariens ici, pour les Franco-manitobains, pour les Acadiens. Et c'est quelque chose dont je suis très fier. Je pense que les organisations qui nous appuient sont très fiers parce qu'ils nous ont demandé depuis très longtemps d'augmenter nos niveaux d'immigration francophone en dehors du Québec. I'll translate it a bit. Federal government hasn't always done the greatest job making sure that we were helping smaller Francophone communities outside Quebec maintain they're often smaller. I know Toronto has a big Francophone community. It's quite proud of it, but smaller communities are usually the norm outside Quebec. And I increased those levels from 3 to 10%, rather 4 to 10% over the last year or two. And that's something I think that we can be quite proud of as a country, because we are a bilingual country. It doesn't mean languages have effective legal equal standing, and those communities are ones that have been asked. Immigration isn't the only solution, but it is one of the big solutions that we've provided to those communities. So the funding actually will increase as part of our Francophone strategy. There's also support that communities can get for housing, because often in those communities there aren't too many spots available for proper housing. But it is something that we've committed to as part of our French language strategy that has a lot of money attached to it. So it's not just getting 10% of immigrants that are Francophone and saying, figure it out, guys. It's about making sure they're properly placed in communities and integrating. And provincial governments have a really big role in that, given the need for services and the need to properly integrate them, particularly provinces that do have strong Francophone populations, or in the case of New Brunswick, a bilingual status.
Okay, I think we have room for one more question. So this is another audience question. Can you provide any update on the Rural Community Immigration Pilot Program?
It's coming. It's the short answer. I've been a little busy, but it is so for everyone's benefit, and everyone, this is the demographic reality of take away immigration for a second, but big cities attract people, and depopulation in rural communities is a fact of life, whether you're an immigrant or not. If you look at the profile of people that migrate to Canada, there are provinces that have a pull factor, and there are provinces that are fighting against the current. That is most of the smaller provinces. Part of that is making sure the federal government's doing its job in attracting immigrants to rural communities where there is housing, there's a need for people, and are actually revitalizing communities. And so, making sure, and this is part of the poll you quoted. Is not anti-immigrant sentiment, but the need for the federal government actually to get it right, for provincial governments to align supply and demand. What we've seen in our rural northern immigration pilot is a retention rate that is quoted in around 80+%, which is good. And it's because we give funds and resources to communities to take agency in the people that they welcome, to help select it. I mean, it is psychologically and factually better for a smaller community to welcome people and make sure that they're properly accompanied. And that's something we'll continue to do. I need to roll it out soon, so the answer to the shorter answer is in a couple weeks.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. This was a really great conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone. Thank you, Minister Miller, for coming to beautiful Toronto today, and give us your thoughts and context about Canadian immigration. There are a lot going on, and we are hoping like for the beautiful Canada and for a better Canada. And one thing that is very, very important to know, that this country belongs to all of us, and we all have to be hopeful, and we all have to do our part to make it better. I'm pretty sure federal government, provincial government, universities, colleges, all of us as a citizen, we have to do one thing. But one thing for sure, we cannot ever lose our bright and positive sentiments about immigration. We are a country with fertility rate of 1.26. So the moment that goes down, this country's bright future won't be as bright. So whatever happens, let's all be positive. Let's welcome the immigrants that they come in. And together, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming here. And you have a great, great time forward. Thank you.